On behalf of the University of Ghana, it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome you to the 2020 University of Ghana Alumni Lecture. This lecture is being streamed live on University of Ghana media handles, Facebook and YouTube. Extracts would also be tweeted with the hashtag AlumniUG2020. Our media handle is University Ghana. Now, may I please be seated? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. So sorry. Welcome again. Now, may I invite the chairperson of the University of Ghana Alumni Association Council, Mr. Richard Obin Okra, to formally welcome you.
Once again, I am very deeply privileged to warmly welcome you to this year's Alumni Lecture. Before I do that, I would like to mention that we have a very strong representation from the Bank of Ghana here, as well as some embassies and institutions. But permit me to mention the representatives from the Bank of Ghana. We are expecting other guests as we proceed. I'm told that traffic is very unforgiving in Accra today. So I believe that before we are through, we will be able to receive additional guests. We have with us today the first Deputy Governor of the bank in the person of Dr. Maxwell Opoku Aferi. You are very welcome, sir. We also have the second Deputy Governor of the bank in the person of Mrs. Elsie Ado Awadzi. Yeah. Other personalities will be introduced as and when they arrive. This is my opportunity to make a couple of remarks before the actual event takes off. You agree with me that in normal times, this hall would have been packed to capacity. On an occasion like this, when another very eminent alumnus is delivering our annual lecture. These are, however, not normal times. And that accounts for the need for us to consciously reduce numbers to enable us to observe COVID-19 protocols. Ironically, however, in view of the fact that this lecture is being streamed live on radio, TV, and on the normal social media portals, as has been mentioned earlier, we are able to reach an even bigger audience in Ghana and all over the world. At last year's Alumni Lecture, which was delivered by another illustrious alumna in the person of the immediate past Chief Justice, Her Ladyship Sophia Akufu, I had occasion to call on alumni of Legon to stand and be counted in their support of our alma mater as we strive to become a world-class university. I did mention some of the strategies that were being effected to enable us contribute our time and treasure to support projects that would address some of the shortcomings at the university. I specifically made reference to plans to establish an Alumni Reconnect Fund. However, this laudable project, which started on a good note, could not be pursued fully as we were caught midstream by the COVID-19 pandemic, which made it impossible for us to realize our objectives. These hurdles notwithstanding, the Alumni Association was able to raise funds through the support of EPP Books Limited to re-roof the children's ward at the University Hospital that was damaged by a severe rainstorm. I wish to assure alumni in Ghana and worldwide that these plans to set up the mega fund have not been abandoned, as we are currently seeing our way clearer to refocus on our objective of organizing the fundraising initiative to solicit funds from a critical mass of at least 150,000 alumni of this great university. We are doing this in collaboration with Stanbic Bank. The initial target was to raise 250 million cedis to enable us partner with the University of Ghana Enterprise Limited, UGEL, to invest in hostels to improve student accommodation, the student accommodation deficit on campus. During this period of lull, I'm happy to inform our alumni community that UGEL's capacity to enter into financial arrangements with the Alumni Association has been enhanced by the university through a restructuring of the company by reviewing its governance structure. UGEL now has in place a new board of directors and key management staff to drive the vision of the company. And by extension, the pandemic has brought in its wake new challenges that affect the delivery of teaching and learning at the university. In this respect, there is an urgent need to modernize the university's teaching and learning facilities. Currently, university senior management has set in motion a project to procure and install capital-intensive information technology equipment to facilitate in-person teaching as well as online delivery of lectures in response to these challenges. The Alumni Association commends senior management for this real-time response to the challenge. The Alumni Association would like to be associated with this step by making funds available to the university through sponsorship programs to enable the university meet its related capital expenditure in 2021. The rationale for this capital outlay is to upgrade classrooms to the standard befitting of a world-class university that we aspire to become. These infrastructural improvements will increase access to teaching and learning services to accommodate the increasing number of students, particularly as a result of the free SHS policy now in place. It will also innovatively manage the high teacher-student ratio and offer either face-to-face or online education. Again, as alumni, we will be making a very positive contribution to the university's other plans to upgrade regional learning centers into well-resourced extramural campuses. The objective of the university management is to make the regional learning centers self-sustaining and financially viable institutions. Some of the world-class universities that we seek to emulate have been extending their networks globally by setting up branch campuses, and the least we can do in the immediate term should be the pursuit of enhancing these regional centers that will be principally driven by information technology to enable us to remain relevant outside our main campus in partial pursuit of our strategic objectives. We are in a period of change, and it is up to us to embrace this change and capitalize on the opportunities offered by the pandemic. For the first time in Legon's 72-year history, the university graduated students virtually, and these circumstances are challenging us to keep pace with the new normal to become a better institution in our relentless determination not to be overtaken by sister institutions in global rankings. It is for this reason, among others, that the concept of improving our learning centers in the regions and facilities on the main campus should resonate positively with our stakeholders. We are therefore not only grateful to alumni, but also to corporate bodies for their support, most especially the Bank of Ghana, who are the main sponsors for this program today, the Volta River Authority, Chemical Limited, UBA, ZPay, GT Bank, Zenith Bank, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Consolidated Bank of Ghana, UBM, Prudential Bank, Low Country Water Company, and KPMG, as well as our media sponsors, namely City FM, Multimedia, Radio Universe, Daily Guide, and the Business and Financial Times for sponsoring this year's Alumni Lecture. Some corporate bodies have shown exceptional leadership in supporting the university, and we are happy to recognize and commend the Bank of Ghana again for the construction of the new City Center building, which is an extension of the Department of Economics that houses lecture halls, seminar rooms, as well as a world-class, ultra-modern auditorium. We are very grateful. We are similarly also commending the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation, GNPC, for its support for the Department of Geography and Resource Development, and also their laudable scholarship scheme, among other initiatives. There are a few more such companies, corporate bodies that are supporting the university in diverse ways, and they will be recognized as and when we go on with this program. We are informed that other corporate bodies, such as the Cocoa Board, have plans to cooperate with the university to sponsor the university's strategic plans. We are hereby calling on other corporate bodies and diplomatic missions to extend their social corporate responsibilities to support Legon. To this end, the Alumni Association will be contacting selected companies and embassies to be the agents to drive this organizational change that has started at Legon. In conclusion, I would like to say that we trust the companies that we'll be contacting, as well as the embassies, will be able to see their way clear to assist us to move from the current state in which we are to the desired future state. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Chairman of the University of Ghana Alumni Association Council. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the registrar's representative, Mrs. Mavis Otuaye, who is also the College Secretary of the College of Humanities, will introduce the chairperson for today's lecture. Mrs. Otuaye, your audience.
Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My duty here is to introduce the Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana, Professor Ebenezer Odro-Owusu, who is chairing today's function. The Vice Chancellor is an alumnus of this university, having read Bachelor of Science in Agriculture and graduating in 1987. He was awarded the prestigious Mombusho Scholarship offered by the Japanese government and successfully completed his Master of Science degree in Agricultural Chemistry and a PhD in Entomology at Kochi University, Japan. Professor Owusu was immediately appointed Assistant Professor at Kochi University in April 1995 and then Associate Professor in September 1995. Professor Owusu joined faculty at the University of Ghana in 1998 and has had a distinguished career of over 2 decades. During this period, Professor Owusu has provided excellent academic and managerial leadership at his various appointments as head of department of the Department of Animal Biology and Conservation Science, Vice Dean of the Faculty of Science, Acting Dean and Dean of the School of Biological Sciences, and Provost of the College of Basic and Applied Sciences. On 1st August 2016, Professor Owusu was appointed Vice Chancellor of our great university. Working with the Alumni Association and as a member of the Alumni Council, the Vice Chancellor always chairs the annual Alumni Lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Professor Ebenezer Odro-Owusu as the chairman of the 2020 Alumni Lecture.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mavis Otuaye. Since this is being live streamed, let me do the honor of going through the protocols, because we have a whole lot of people watching from outside this hall. Governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Ernest Addison, and his 2 deputies, Chairman and members of the University Council, Pro-Vice Chancellors, Registrars, Provosts, former Chairpersons of Council, former vice chancellors, deans and directors, members of convocation, president and members of the Alumni Council and Association of this great university, honorable members, ministers and members of parliament, former members of government and parliament, members of the diplomatic corps, esteemed traditional rulers, Nananum, Nime, Name, employees and students of the university, treasured alumni of this great university, members of the press, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. We are pleased to have the 15th Governor of the Bank of Ghana, Mr. Ernest Addison, to deliver today's lecture on the topic, the pandemic, the economy, and the outlook. Distinguished guests, it's understood that the world, since recording started, has witnessed about 15 different pandemics until COVID-19. As noted in the abstract of today's lecture, COVID-19 has been described as the most health crisis ever on record, with dire economic consequences globally. While the world was asked to stay at home, referred to as the Great Lockdown, scientists have been busy in the lab developing vaccines. Similarly, government and monetary policy authorities, including our own lecturer for today, have also been busy formulating and implementing a mixture of fiscal and monetary policies to mitigate, especially the pandemic's adverse distributional effect on households and businesses. As a university, we are concerned about the job losses and further restrictions that the pandemic and the numerous containment measures impose on the growth drivers of our economy, which limits the chances of our graduates finding decent and sustainable employment. Mr. Governor, because of the extremely harsh socioeconomic conditions that COVID-19 has visited on the world and its obvious ramifications on livelihoods, I'm very much interested in the outlook you would paint to us this evening. I'm not an economist, but I want to have a fair idea of the nature of the economic recovery Ghana is going to experience. In addition, I look forward to job-based economic recovery that credible data supports. And again, I look forward to people-centered economic recovery that tackles inequality aggressively. The pandemic literally affected everyone, including churches and other religious bodies. It is my hope, therefore, that the economic recovery will equally impact literally every Ghanaian. As a university, we have equally been concerned with the limited fiscal space available to government from 2021 and the implications for tertiary education funding, whilst we also look within for the necessary budgetary realignment underpinned by efficiency and elimination of waste. On this note, I accept to chair this year's Alumni Lecture and wish the lecturer all the best, while those of us listening are encouraged to do so attentively. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. We shall now have Mr. Kwesi Nyanki, former chairperson of the University of Ghana Alumni Association Council, to introduce the lecturer for this evening. Mr. Nyanki. Mr. Nyanki.
Thank you, Eccles. The August alumni here with us today, the chairman, the governor, and deputy governors, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I would like to associate myself with the various protocols which the Vice Chancellor has already enumerated. To deliver the 2020 Alumni Lecture on Pandemic, the Economy and Outlook. Is a very fine, qualified, and experienced gentleman. A 1986 alumnus, and I would like to add that he is my younger brother, as I have adopted him. He graduated with a BA degree in economics from the University of Ghana in June 1986, following it with an MPhil degree in economics and politics from Cambridge University as an ODA scholar, and thereafter a PhD degree in economics from McGill University in Montreal, Canada in June 1993, with specialization in monetary economics, economic development, and international economics. He was a teaching assistant and lecturer at the Department of Economics at the University of Ghana and McGill University. He worked extensively in the economic policy arena with a group of consultants on the privatization of the Kingston Harbour in Jamaica. He joined the Bank of Ghana from the year 2003 to 2011, rising to head the research department, during which period he played key roles in the decision-making processes of the central bank. He participated in several discussions with IMF, the World Bank, teams on Ghana's financial program, and was a core member of the bank's delegation to high-level policy meetings on the Ghanaian economy. He chaired several committees, including the International Task Force on the West African Monetary Zone, the Economic Policy Coordinating Committee, the Technical Committee on Redomination of the City, and the Task Force on Second Monetary Zone projects. He joined the African Development Bank as lead economist from the year 2011 to the year 2013. Following this exceptional professional career spanning over 30 years, working in the broader areas of public service that focus on economic development, monetary policy formulation, and implementation of macroeconomic surveillance, this illustrious son of Mother Ghana was appointed governor of the Bank of Ghana on April 3rd, 2017 by His Excellency, the President of the Republic, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo. Armed with a deep knowledge and experience in the financial and foreign exchange markets, macroeconomic management competencies, it is little wonder that he inspires confidence and credibility both within the bank and throughout the country's financial sector. Under his leadership, the Bank of Ghana has chalked several successes, notably the achieving of macroeconomic and financial stability, implementing prudent monetary policies, thereby reducing inflation to single digits. By undertaking widespread financial sector policy cum regulatory reforms, the sector was cleaned up, its governance and supervisory frameworks strengthened, repositioning it to facilitate financial intermediation for the growth and development of the country. Additional to his governorship role, he served as the elected 2020 chair of the Board of Governors of the IMF and the World Bank, and is currently a co-chair of the Financial Stability Board, a regional consultative group for sub-Saharan Africa, chairman of the Board of Directors of the Ghana International Bank, a member of the Ghana Cocoa Marketing Board, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the question that I pose is, who is best positioned to deliver this lecture? This can only be done by our very own distinguished alumnus, Dr. Ernest Kwamna Yedu Addison, the Governor of the Bank of Ghana, our guest speaker and lecturer for the Alumni 2020 lecture. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Kenya Kopon say it say Asidan Kanidi say it kwam akuneni anintina mwashia nananu matina nkonya ema ne mema mamunyina atinasio Yenina nim Adikodi entia yeshemui Uta entia yewaha University wo ekobia That's the University of Alumni Association Say koi Afibia Ebedwe munchire Nedruswa Eshisho titreni Eshisho bia onimde No wako kudro No onimdie Na mansani mno Na yeshishe mwa Yenya beme nyonyafo Ono ni enya no Bema onimde Ghana bakuma Beme nyonyafo Dr. Ernest Kwamna Addison Ejaya mawakwabo Dada wasende wadajie Out me the buyer Yamamo Nti sene sanke yeshemwa Yabe kasa fagana yesika semho Webra ya record ye way baye Onimsika semho nimdie Ti yamawakwabo Ebrenya ebre Eje yamawakwabo Yamawakwabo
First, let me say a big thank you to Mr. Pakwesi Yankee for that very able introduction. Mr. Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana, Professor Odro Owusu, Chairman and members of the University Council, Chairman of the Alumni Association, Mr. Obeng Okra, Council members of the University of Ghana Alumni Association, fellow alumni of the University of Ghana, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is a privilege to join you today to deliver this year's Alumni Lecture. Coming back to this great institution has brought back fond memories of my days on the Legon campus over 3 decades ago, shuffling between Mensa Saba Hall Annex A and the Economics Department. I sincerely thank the Alumni Association for the kind invitation and to join the list of distinguished speakers of the University of Ghana Alumni Lecture Series. Ladies and gentlemen, when I received the invitation to deliver this year's Alumni Lecture, the first thing that came to my mind was the devastating effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the global economy, how that will transmit to the Ghanaian economy, and the enormous challenges to public policy, including macroeconomic management. Since the inception of the pandemic, policies have been crafted and extraordinary measures imposed to contain its spread and manage the human, economic, and social consequences. This single event, which probably happens once in a lifetime, has caused some fundamental shifts in the global economy and disrupted social and cultural norms. We no longer greet each other warmly, and we are continuously masked up as if we are at a masquerade party. This has become the new normal. In some circles, the COVID-19 pandemic has been described as a tail event or a black swan event. Such events rarely happen, and when they do, they rest within the tail end of a probability distribution. Indeed, 2020 has turned out as exceptional and will surely leave an indelible mark on our thinking for years to come. As grim as it sounds, COVID-19 is not the first pandemic to hit the human race. Throughout history, there has been several pandemics, with some arguably much worse than the COVID-19 in terms of the number of people who succumbed to the disease. Let me highlight a few of these, starting with the Antonine Plague, 165 AD to 180 AD, which was also known as the Plague of Galen and killed over 2,000 people per day at the height of that pandemic. The Black Death from 1347 to 1352, which swept through Europe and Asia, among other continents, and killed an estimated 25 million people. The smallpox pandemic of 1870 to 1874, which spread from Europe to Asia through America, causing over 500,000 deaths worldwide. Then the cholera pandemic of 1817 to 1824, which emerged in India in 1817 and reached different countries in Asia, Europe, and Eastern Africa, also killing more than 100,000 people. The Russian flu from 1889 to 1890, which started in St. Petersburg and spread through Europe with an estimated 1 million deaths. Then you have the Spanish flu between 1918 and 1919, which is considered the deadliest in history, infecting 1/3 of the world's population and killing 20 to 50 million people worldwide. Then we have the H3N2 pandemic of 1968, which first emerged in Hong Kong in July 1968, and by December had reached the United States, United Kingdom, and other countries in Europe, killing an estimated 1 million people. And then the SARS outbreak of 2002 to 2004, first reported in Guangdong, China in February 2002, which spread throughout North America, South America, Europe, and Asia. It infected more than 8,000 people worldwide and killed 774 people. All these pandemics varied significantly in terms of the human cause, depending on the severity and how it was dealt with. A stark difference between these other pandemics and the COVID-19 pandemic is that it has led to much stricter public health measures and birthed a new socio-economic order. As we know, COVID-19 brought in its wake unprecedented disruptions to global supply chains due to travel restrictions, business closures, and weakened demand for goods and services. Notwithstanding these events, we have now learned that decisions write history, and this pandemic presents an opportunity for policymakers to write an impactful history through their decisions. In fact, from history, humankind has fought and overcome several pandemics, and major economies have subsequently recovered even more strongly after pandemic episodes. So we remain optimistic about the final outcome of the COVID-19 pandemic, and hopefully our collective decisions will be viewed positively by historians or for posterity to judge. Mr. Vice Chancellor, President of the Alumni Association, fellow alumni, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, at the global front, the emergence of the coronavirus in late 2019 and its subsequent explosion into a full-blown pandemic has been described as the most serious health crisis since the 1918 Spanish flu, and the most economically costly in recent history due to global interconnectedness. It moved rapidly across borders, along principal arteries of the global economy, and catapulted the global health crisis into a global economic shock. The topmost public policy objective in COVID-affected countries was to strike a good balance between saving lives, a public health objective, and protecting existing structures that support livelihoods, an economic policy objective. This game theoretic objective, I believe, has challenged policymakers globally. It is one that I strongly believe John Nash could not easily have addressed with his Nobel Prize-winning masterpiece on the Nash equilibrium. Different countries have managed this challenge differently. Governments impose restrictions such as quarantines, border closures, workplace closures, social distance rules to slow the rate of transmission and deaths associated with the pandemic. Although these public health countermeasures succeeded in flattening the COVID-19 curve, they also caused significant disruptions to global economic activity. Global demand and activity fell sharply. Exports decreased in both the advanced and emerging market economies and almost halved in the large oil-producing countries. The initial lockdowns and closure of borders also interrupted international trade, tourism, and regional trade, which are important sources of export revenue for many countries. Remittances were affected too, as migrant workers were hit by the pandemic hard. The World Bank estimates a 20% fall in global remittances for 2020, although remittances have proved resilient in some countries, including Ghana. Global financial markets were also stressed by the pandemic. For instance, in the months of February and March 2020 were characterized by large swings in global stock markets, reversal of capital flows to emerging market and developing economies, and widening of EMDE sovereign bond spreads. In addition, the weak global demand and the inability of OPEC and its allies to agree on production cuts led to the collapse of oil prices and further worsened financial market risk sentiments. These developments led to tighter global financing conditions in both advanced and EMDEs. The intensity of the virus and its socio-economic consequences demanded swift and decisive policy reactions. Synchronized massive fiscal policy packages and supportive monetary policy measures were implemented in many countries to deal with the fallout from the crisis. In particular, central banks deployed a mix of conventional and unconventional measures depending on country-specific policy space to ease off the socio-economic consequences of the pandemic. Consistent with traditional responses to such negative economic shocks, the toolkit deployed by central banks in advanced and emerging market economies was to aggressively cut policy rates. For instance, the United States Federal Reserve cut its policy rate by 150 basis points in March 2020, while the Bank of England cut the rate by 65 basis points. Similarly, in the emerging market economies, policy rates in Turkey, Brazil, and Russia were all cut by 300, 150, and 115 basis points, respectively. In addition to the rate cuts, central banks in advanced economies embraced other unconventional measures, such as direct lending programs to small and medium-scale enterprises to boost economic activity. To safeguard liquidity in the financial sector, central banks also provided short-term interbank lending facilities and resumed massive asset purchase programs to ensure the smooth functioning of financial markets and credit flows. In the United States, fiscal policy measures took the form of direct support to firms and households, credit and loan guarantees such as emergency grants, and loan forgiveness programs for SMEs, launched by the US government, also known as the Paycheck Protection Program under the CARES Act, and other measures such as the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, extension of tax filing deadline for individuals and businesses, deferment of student loan repayment by 6 months, and refundable tax credit for all businesses to cover wages for employees unable to work due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Similar measures were implemented across other advanced economies. The policy response in emerging market economies was no different. A multiplicity of unconventional policy actions were taken, and these included direct foreign exchange intervention to stem volatilities in the exchange rate, direct lending to SMEs, granting of loans to financial institutions, foreign exchange swap transactions, lowering of reserve requirements, asset purchase programs, direct lending to exporters, easing of capital conservation buffers, among others. At the last count, at the beginning of the third quarter, EMDEs had utilized 12 different unconventional tools to stem the impact of the pandemic on their economies. In emerging market economies, central banks intensified foreign exchange interventions to smooth in currency volatilities. Across sub-Saharan Africa, policy responses to the pandemic varied depending on country-specific conditions, but not distinctly different from those in advanced and emerging market economies. Remarkably, monetary and macro-prudential policies were eased to support economic growth and provide adequate liquidity in the financial systems. Amid limited fiscal space, most central banks in the region, with inflation well contained, cut policy rates to support the recovery process, with some bringing it down to historical lows. For instance, Ghana cut the policy rate by 150 basis points, South Africa by 275 basis points, Uganda by 200 basis points. Central banks also introduced a variety of facilities to inject liquidity into the banking system, with some lending directly to targeted sectors. Botswana, South Africa, Kenya, and Malawi, and many more announced lower reserve or liquidity requirements for commercial lenders to encourage more lending. In addition to the policy rate cuts and liquidity measures, some central banks encourage banks to work with their clients to restructure their obligations to the banks. These range from a temporary moratorium on loan payments in Botswana, Namibia, Sao Tome and Principe, or through a restructuring of existing obligations. This was in Botswana, Eswatini, Ethiopia, Kenya, Namibia, Nigeria, and Uganda. Some central banks have also relaxed prudential constraints. For example, by easing capital requirements, this happened in Botswana and Ghana, or by delaying the transition to Basel III norms. This is the West African Economic and Monetary Union. With higher spending, lower revenues, reduced external funding, and waning investor appetite for government debt, some Saharan African countries have already tapped the central bank to fund their crisis spending during the lockdown. These include the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ghana, and Mauritius. Many central banks with enough reserve buffers also intervene in the foreign exchange markets to stem exchange volatility arising from capital flow reversals by providing extra liquidity to the domestic financial system. Many countries encourage the use of digital money, leveraging on digital money platforms to help channel cash payments. This included measures such as increasing the transaction limits and removal or reduction of fees. There was also direct fiscal support to the large proportion of vulnerable households and businesses. Transfers to households took the form of food distribution, school meals, lowering of utility bills, and tax waivers. Given pre-existing economic fragilities, huge financing gaps, and weak health infrastructure in most African countries, it became clear that additional financing would be needed to dampen the adverse effects of the pandemic in these countries. Ladies and gentlemen, the size of the financial support needed to combat the adverse economic consequences of the pandemic prompted several countries to apply for financial assistance from the multilateral agencies. According to the IMF estimates, official creditors mobilized up to $57 billion for Africa, including $18 billion from the IMF and the World Bank, to provide frontline health services, support the poor and vulnerable, and keep economies afloat in the face of the worst global economic downturn since the 1930s. So far, the IMF's total emergency financing for some 28 sub-Saharan African countries was estimated at $9.97 billion. Furthermore, some 20 African countries have benefited from debt relief estimated at $251.2 million. The data for the first half of 2020 showed that the global economy experienced a sharp contraction due to restrictions imposed to contain the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, survey data into the third quarter of the year points to signs of recovery, driven by the easing of restrictions and the decisive monetary and fiscal policy support. The recovery is expected to be gradual and uneven in view of the cautious behavior of both households and firms. Also, the COVID-19 containment measures vary across countries, and the recoveries will reflect these variations. Despite these early encouraging signs of recovery, the outlook for the global economy remains highly uncertain, with COVID-19 infections continuing to increase as countries ease restrictions, sparking fears of a second and even third wave of infections, requiring reimposition of restrictions and leading to further slowdown in the world economy. The recent resurgence of the pandemic in the United States and parts of Europe lends credence to the uncertain path of the pandemic in the near term. Also, events related to the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic are still evolving, and there is considerable uncertainty about the duration of the spread and how quickly countries will recover. The IMF forecasts that global growth will contract by 4.4% in 2020. If this materializes, the COVID-19 pandemic may possibly become one of the most economically costly pandemics in recent history. This notwithstanding, the recent announcement of coronavirus vaccines with more than 90% efficacy and the subsequent approval to administer these vaccines in the United Kingdom and other advanced economies has fueled optimism and restored some hope about a return to normalcy in the near term. Already, coronavirus vaccines are being administered in China, Russia, Brazil, and the United States. This positive news has boosted global economic recovery prospects in 2021 and beyond. At this stage, fellow alumni, I would like to shift the focus to how the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the domestic economy and delve into the various decisive and coordinated policy measures taken to moderate the financial and economic costs. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ghanaian economy ended 2019 on a sound footing before the COVID-19 pandemic came knocking. This followed the successful implementation of a sound macroeconomic framework with fiscal consolidation and prudent monetary and exchange rate policies over the last 3 years, which had yielded good outcomes. Inflation at 7.9% was within the medium-term target band of 8 plus or minus 2%. The exchange rate was relatively stable. The current account had improved significantly, alongside 3 consecutive years of trade surpluses of around $2 billion US. And the Bank of Ghana had built strong foreign exchange reserves of about $8.4 billion US. In addition, economic growth had rebounded strongly to 6.5%, supported by growth-oriented government policy initiatives to boost agriculture and manufacturing. In the financial sector, the Bank of Ghana had successfully concluded 3 years of banking sector reforms, which saw an increase in the minimum capital requirement, the revocation of licenses of insolvent institutions, the so-called banking sector cleanup, and a complete overhaul of the regulatory and supervisory frameworks. The cleanup resulted in a stable and resilient banking and XDI sector that is well capitalized, liquid, and solvent. By the end of 2019, all the financial sector soundness indicators showed improvements. The overall capital adequacy ratio for banks had increased to 20%, well above the regulatory requirement. The non-performing loans ratio had declined from 21.3% at the end of December 2017 to 15.3%. Liquidity in the industry had improved and profitability was on the uptrend. We had also seen significant increase in the use of digital financial services, thanks to some of the measures instituted, including the National Financial Inclusion and Development Strategy, the Digital Financial Services Strategy, and the Cash Light Policy. This policy framework was intended to scale up access to financial services from 58% in 2015 to 85% by 2023 through increased digital financial services that would help promote the economic empowerment of the poor and marginalized. So with the strong economic fundamentals, a sound and stable financial sector, as well as fairly developed payment system, ladies and gentlemen, Ghana was positioned to prepare to consolidate the gains made with the reforms, even in the face of challenges that typically arise during election years. A track record badly needed to shape Ghana's story to international investors. But as the Bible puts it, many are the plans in the heart of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that prevails. This well thought out objective was shattered, if I'm allowed to use that word, with the unprecedented and unexpected shock that came with the advent of the coronavirus on the Ghanaian people. The real ramifications of this shock and the extraordinary demands on the government as the guardian of public safety and welfare became severe after several weeks. The first two COVID-19 cases were imported into the country on 14th March 2020, and it did not take long for the numbers to start multiplying, first from Accra, Kumasi, and on to the other regions. Following the steady increase in the COVID-19 cases and the threat of a weakening and already burdened health sector, the government imposed a 3-week partial lockdown beginning March 30th in the major cities of Accra and Kumasi as a containment measure to stop the spread. Akin to other country experiences, this proved to be a game changer and led to a sudden stop in economic activity. Educational institutions, transport services, the airport, recreation centers, and hotels and restaurants were all shut down. In addition, manufacturing companies scaled back operations. Workplaces were closed except for key staff, while markets operated at half capacity. Now, this partial lockdown had a tremendous impact on economic activity, household incomes, the government's own revenues and jobs, as companies laid off staff or cut back wages and salaries. The first inkling of the impact of the virus was felt in the prices of goods and services. The announcement of a lockdown triggered panic buying as households stocked up on goods across the city centers of Accra and Kumasi, resulting in a sharp increase in headline inflation from 7.8% in March to 10.6% in April and further up to 11.3% in May 2020 due to the astronomical jump in food prices. The impact of the COVID-19 also presented as both a demand and supply shock to the domestic economy. On the supply side, there were disruptions to productive activities as employees fell victim to the virus, while disruptions to global supply chains led to shortage of raw materials and inputs for manufacturing activity, which led to increased costs of production, including costs associated with adoption of new health and safety protocols. On the demand side, companies experienced weak consumer demand due to closure of businesses and job losses. With these constraints, major businesses faced difficulties in honoring obligations such as staff compensation, suppliers' credit, utility bills, and servicing of their loans with financial institutions. Fellow alumni, the COVID-19 also impacted the economy as an external shock through the contraction of trade and fall in commodity prices, tourism, and international capital flows. By the second quarter of the year, the full effect of the pandemic was showing in slower growth in domestic economic activity, adversely impacting livelihoods and threatening to erode the economic and financial stability gains achieved over the preceding 3 years. The developments placed severe constraints on government finances, arising from significant revenue shortfalls on the back of weakened domestic economic activity and the collapse in international crude oil prices, coupled with increased government expenditures due to COVID-related spending. The large informal economy, which in the past used to provide a cushion to such shocks, this time around amplified the shock as the lockdowns brought a halt to informal activities as well. Therefore, providing a sense of security to market participants and the public required close coordination between various stakeholders and the implementation of monetary, fiscal, and macro-prudential policies to limit the impact of the pandemic on the broader economy. Obviously, the onset of the outbreak brought intense pressure on government fiscal operations, pushing the economy off the consolidation path as the government took actionable steps and instituted programs to moderate the social and economic consequences. The government had to increase health and social assistance spending, including direct transfers to households, including food distribution, several relief packages such as tax waivers for frontline health workers, stimulus packages for small and medium-scale enterprises, absorption of utility, bills, electricity and water, etc. All of these were aimed at protecting livelihoods, supporting businesses, minimizing job losses, and providing additional funding sources to industries to shore up output for domestic consumption. The government also introduced an emergency preparedness and response plan of 560 million, equivalent of $100 million US. Clearance was also given to increase staff in the health sector by employing 24,255 additional health workers. Government also refurbished 10 treatment centers across the country and introduced a 10.3 million insurance package for health workers and livelihood preservation program targeting 4.1 million households and 682,522 businesses. To close the funding gap arising from these actions, the government assessed a $1 billion US IMF rapid credit facility as expensive for COVID relief measures ballooned. To complement government's COVID relief measures, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the Bank of Ghana also announced a series of policy and regulatory measures to loosen financing conditions, ease liquidity pressures, and keep credit flowing to support critical sectors of the economy. The bank cut the monetary policy rate, as I had said earlier, by 150 basis points to 14.5% in March 2020, and worked with the commercial banks through moral suasion to transmit the same measure of decline to lending rates. The bank reduced the primary reserve requirements to 8% from 10% to increase liquidity in the banking system. The bank reduced the capital conservation buffer of banks by 1.5 percentage points, implying an effective drop in the capital adequacy requirement from 13 to 11.5%. The provisioning requirements for the spectrum of loan categories was reduced from 10.5%, which helped to ease liquidity conditions and provided capital relief to banks. The bank urged the commercial banks to provide a 6-month moratorium on principal payments on loans due from customers in the worst hit sectors of the economy. The bank also suspended dividend payments by banks for the year 2020 to secure capital buffers. The bank provided assurance to strengthen the capacity of the ARB Apex Bank to provide liquidity support for rural and community banks facing temporary liquidity challenges. It also extended the deadline for SDIs, that is the microfinance institutions and the rural and community banks, to meet new capital requirements to December 2021 from an earlier deadline date of 28 February 2020. Similarly, loan repayments that were past due for microfinance institutions for up to 30 days were reclassified as current. The bank also reduced the cash reserve requirement for rural and community banks, savings and loan companies, and finance houses from 8 to 6%, and from 10 to 8% for microfinance companies. In order to encourage the use of digital forms of payment, the bank agreed with banks and mobile money operators on the elimination of transaction fees of mobile money transfers of up to 100 cedis, and a revision of the transaction limits upwards to further promote the use of digital solutions such as mobile money and online transactions. Fellow alumni, besides these monetary policy and macro-prudential measures, the Bank of Ghana also triggered its asset purchase program in line with the emergency provisions in the Bank of Ghana Act 202, that is Act 612 as amended, and purchased the Government of Ghana COVID-19 relief bond with a face value of 10 billion cedis at the monetary policy rate with a 10-year tenor and a moratorium of 2 years in May 2020. The Bank of Ghana issued several notices to guide banks and SDIs on the utilization of capital and liquidity releases, as well as to ensure business continuity. In this context, banks and SDIs were required to activate business continuity and disaster recovery plans to ensure full-time access to banking services during the period of the outbreak and restricted movements, and to review these plans on a continuous basis. The banks were to ensure full functionality of all electronic channels and ensure that ATMs did not run out of cash. They were also to develop COVID-19 contingency plans to help assess and identify the possible risk scenarios and mitigating measures to deal with these scenarios, including crisis management plans that seek to mark out specific actions to be taken based on the COVID-19 case thresholds. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Ghana faced multi-layered shocks with the advent of the pandemic, including domestic economic disruptions, the challenging global environment which induced global supply disruptions and weakened demand for exports. The impact of the pandemic reflected in negative growth rates, declining GDP per capita across most African countries, which almost wiped out 5 to 6 years of economic progress by the third quarter of 2020, and increased extreme poverty. In addition to the slower growth, fiscal pressures became elevated, necessitating a revision of the 2020 projections for the economy. Amid weak external demand, it became very necessary to revise the macro framework for Ghana, with the GDP growth for 2020 revised downward to 0.9% from the pre-COVID projection of 6.8%, while the fiscal deficit was revised upward to 11.4% of GDP from an earlier projected 4.7% of GDP in 2020. With a significant slowdown in growth and a widening budget deficit, the economy was facing the prospect of instability without the appropriate measures to provide additional financing. Bank of Ghana, on the basis of recent data, believes that our economy is on a rebound, and that this rebound can be attributed to the evidence of some green shoots in economic activity gleaned from the Bank of Ghana surveys on consumer self-confidence, which has bounced back to the pre-lockdown levels as consumers responded favorably to the gradual lifting of restrictions, providing some scope for undertaking meaningful economic activities. Business confidence has also improved, although the index remained below pre-lockdown levels. Our latest high-frequency economic indicators, such as consumer spending, industrial consumption of electricity, and construction activities, have all reached pre-lockdown levels. Just yesterday, the Ghana Statistical Service put out an estimate of the third quarter GDP growth, suggesting that the economy contracted by 1.3% during the third quarter. It must be pointed out that this is consistent with the rebound view, as the economy has recovered from a contraction of 3.1% to 1.1% during the quarter. Recent report from the International Growth Center corroborates this view, as employment rates and hours worked per adult, which fell substantially in March and April, have largely reverted to its pre-COVID levels in August and September. Headline inflation has also eased to single digits at 9.8% in November. In the financial sector, the policy and regulatory relief measures introduced by the bank have enhanced liquidity in the banking system, preserved capital buffers, and provided relief to customers severely impacted. These measures have also helped banks and SDIs to provide support to critical sectors of the economy to mitigate the adverse impact of the pandemic. The downward adjustment of the monetary policy rate impacted positively. An average lending rate of banks has steadily declined to 20.9% in November 2020 from 24% a year ago. Banks have also signaled a net easing of credit stance on enterprise loans in the months ahead as new advances steadily rise. Ladies and gentlemen, the banking sector remains liquid and well positioned to support growth, benefiting significantly from the recent reforms. To a large extent, the policy interventions have also helped to improve the soundness of the banking sector and reduce the potential adverse spillback effects that the sector may have had on the macro-financial landscape. The sector remains robust, as reflected by the strong financial soundness indicators, capital adequacy levels being above regulatory limits, the NPL ratio has declined and profitability remains strong. As part of the financial sector surveillance, fellow alumni, the bank assessed the resilience of the banking system to credit and liquidity shocks emanating from the pandemic. The findings revealed that overall, the banking sector is robust and largely resilient to the pandemic-related shocks. In addition, tail risks arising from the changing macroeconomic landscape has had a moderate effect, and the banking sector soundness index has improved from the pre-pandemic levels. At the global level, there is beginning to emerge a consensus that the recovery process will be prolonged due to the significant scarring of the economy. Although some countries have made significant progress, threats of a second wave of infections and concerns about the reimposition of restrictive movements have heightened uncertainty. A recent study that investigated the long-term impact of a sample of 12 major epidemics in Europe concluded that pandemics are followed by years of low natural interest rates as the accommodative policy stance persists for a longer period due to household behavior, which raises precautionary savings and depresses investment opportunities. On this basis, it is expected that the global and indeed the domestic outlook will be challenging with a longer recovery process. Domestically, the Bank of Ghana, in collaboration with the fiscal authorities, responded decisively to easing the credit conditions and liquidity within the sector to stimulate economic activity. The bank's action to trigger emergency financing support to the government was largely enabled by the policy space and gains achieved over 3 years of strong monetary policy reforms. Prior to this action, the bank had observed a strict zero financing of the budget in line with a memorandum of understanding between it and the Ministry of Finance as part of the IMF program. This policy, therefore, represented a major shift, reflecting the whatever-it-takes posture to preserve livelihoods and lives, which held in closing the budget widened financing gap. This provided the government with some fiscal space to help it to sustain the income of households, businesses, and we believe this has helped in supporting a quicker turnaround in economic activity. The relatively strong economic outturn in a year of a pandemic, one that is exhibiting strong reserve buffers, low inflation, relatively stable exchange rates, can only be explained by the measures that have been implemented over the past few years, including the recapitalization of banks. Indeed, the data shows that since 2018, non-resident holdings of our domestic debt have declined from 32% to 18% in 2020, even as government financing needs remain high. This can only be possible because the recapitalization of the banking sector has given the banks enough resources to allow them to substitute for the exit of non-resident investors in government bond instruments. It is anticipated that should the projected consolidation of fiscal policy materialize, we should begin to see these resources channeled back to the private sector. The major reason for or rationale for the recapitalization of the banks. At the end of the year, the stage is set to redesign a medium-term macroeconomic framework to return the economy to fiscal consolidation and further consolidate stability to provide an essential lever for positioning the Ghanaian economy on a path of higher growth and a faster pace of poverty alleviation. But as you know, public debt levels have risen following the necessary fiscal expansion in the short term to contain the impact of the pandemic. Hence, there is a need to design a plan to bring down the debt to sustainable levels, to contain risks posed to future financing of the budget, exchange rate stability, and financial stability. This framework should include a clear priority towards expenditure rationalization and efficiency, as well as improving revenue collection capacity. Ghana's public debt has reached 71% of estimated GDP at the end of September 2020, fairly above the maximum early warning sustainability threshold of 70% for market access countries. The country's debt service indicators and gross financing needs have also breached sustainability thresholds. The non-resident holdings of public debt, although declined, is still high at 59.9% of GDP, above the threshold of 45% for market access countries. Public gross financing needs are also above the 10% market access country threshold on the back of increased fiscal obligations, suggesting constrained fiscal space for growth spending. Although the external financing requirement as a share of GDP has declined and within acceptable thresholds, efforts would need to be put into place to increase buffer levels to help meet future external obligations. In ensuring financial stability, the financial sector will require constant regulatory and policy attention to identify and mitigate emerging risks. By and large, the economic impact of the pandemic may result in a higher non-performing loans and some capital erosion of banks. Hence, the bank is putting greater focus on identifying the early warning signals and initiating prompt corrective actions. The symptoms of a weaker bank are usually poor asset quality, the lack of profitability, the loss of capital, excessive leverage, excessive risk exposure, and poor governance conduct, as well as liquidity concerns. In this respect, the Bank of Ghana will continue to strengthen all the regulatory measures implemented over the last 3.5 years to maintain confidence and safeguard financial stability. Over the next 3 years, in the aftermath of the pandemic, the bank will carefully unwind the counter-cyclical measures implemented and allow the financial system to function without the regulatory forbearance that has been put into place due to the pandemic. Banks themselves will have to remain vigilant, upgrade staff capabilities, and improve governance and risk culture. We are optimistic that with this approach, a resilient and capable financial sector will weather the storms brought about by the pandemic and ensure soundness of the industry. The government initiated and implemented policies including the National Financial Inclusion and Development Strategy, the Digital Financial Services Policy, and the Cash Light Roadmap with an overall objective of deepening inclusion and accelerating the shift to digital payments in the country. The significant progress made in this area has significantly helped in the fight against the pandemic with an exponential growth in the volumes and values of digital payment platforms in Ghana. Promoting financial technology has already been at the forefront of the Bank of Ghana's agenda, and we will continue to invest in the supportive infrastructure to improve on the regulatory environment as well as contain all the associated risks to help achieve financial inclusiveness and digital financial transactions to support the national objective. In closing, fellow alumni, let me leave you with some food for thought. First, after almost 4 years of prudent management of the Ghanaian economy, the COVID-19 external shock has partly reversed the progress made on the macroeconomic stability front. So far, fiscal costs in terms of stimulus package deployed to moderate the socio-economic consequences on households and businesses is estimated at over 11.2 billion Ghana cedis. If you add the financial sector costs and the energy sector costs, this raises the estimate of the financial burden from these three sources alone to over 24 billion Ghana cedis. As of half year, it was estimated that the government paid 4.7 billion Ghana cedis in excess capacity payments in the energy sector. This is one of the reasons why the debt to GDP ratio has been pushed above the threshold for the market access countries. Going forward, difficult decisions will have to be taken to reorganize public finances and expenditure priorities while exploring more sustainable revenue measures. The program of interventions to revitalize businesses and cushion households will have to be defined to scale, and there should be no expectation that these should become permanent obligations of the government. The wide fiscal gap raises important financing issues, and its financing should not be by recourse to the central bank's funds, as this will weaken the central bank's ability to serve as the anchor of monetary and exchange rate stability. Mr. Vice Chancellor, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by reiterating that the global economy is not out of the woods yet, and neither is the Ghanaian economy. The pandemic and its socio-economic impact will be felt long after we have reached herd immunity and started seeing the full benefits of the success of the vaccines, which means as public policy makers, we will still be faced with tough decisions that will require a response function asymptotic to Pareto principles. The critical decisions that we take will be judged by posterity. I thank you all for the attention.
We thank Dr. Ernest Addison for his delivery of the 2020 Alumni Lecture on the theme, Pandemic, the Economy and Outlook. May we please give our lecturer another big applause, hand of applause. Next, we have a couple of presentations from the following groups, and they will come in the order as being mentioned. We have the University of Ghana Alumni Association, Universal Merchant Bank, and Department of Economics. May I respectfully ask Dr. Addison to step forward to receive the presentations. University of Ghana Alumni Association. Is that from the email? Yes. Yes. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Until Sylvia, understand you want to step up and do the presentation. So if you can step so she can't climb back. So if you can go slightly down. Okay. Members of the council are joining for a beautiful presentation. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much, University of Ghana Alumni Association. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Please hold Now, next is Universal Merchant Bank. Universal Merchant Bank, your representative, please. UMB. One will do the presentation. Thank you very much, Universal Merchant Bank. Now, the last but not the least, Department of Economics, University of Ghana. The head of department is stepping forward to do the presentation. But you still...
Okay, that's it. Eh?
That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Now, I invite the chairperson, Professor Ebenezer Odro-Owusu, for the closing remarks.
All protocols observed. A very difficult lecture for a non-economist. And I thought as much. It was going to be purely a macroeconomic lecture. But there's no doubt that the governor has exposed us to various dimensions of the effect of COVID-19 pandemic. He has confirmed the fact that the main vehicle through which such pandemic unleashes its effect on the citizen, whether social, economic, or political, is a slowdown of economic activities. The lockdown of Accra, Tema, and Kaswa, as well as Greater Kumasi, and the closure of air, sea, and land borders undoubtedly brought economic activities to a virtual halt, and we can all bear testimonies to this. The effect ranges from fiscal, that is government finances, monetary, business closures, with undermining effects of economic growth, job and income losses of especially households. That's where I want to go micro. Many businesses closed down and lost working capital, clients, and goodwills. And as he said, especially with the banking sector. Essentially, I think government kept all 650,000 workers on its payroll, provided reliefs for citizens, that's electricity and water, and had to endure other unbudgeted health-related expenditure and stimulus packages. And at the same time, I'm sure he said it in a language that most of us did not capture, we suffered reduced revenue, and that's a fact. Banks and other financial institutions had their fair share of the effect of the pandemic as deposits slowed down as against increase in withdrawals. And this was because households had their savings dropped. And debtors struggled to meet their debt obligations. I took a few points from his outlook. It could be assurances, it could be the way forward. But one of the things that we cannot run away from is the fact that government's prudent management of the pandemic and its effect on the citizenry is highly commendable. This is evident in the low infection and death rate and high recovery rates. The director of Noguchi is here. If I give him a chance, I think he can lecture us the whole day on this. Now, potential risk going forward is fiscal challenges, that is deficit. As a result of a slowdown of domestic revenue and high expenditure from the management of the pandemic. And undoubtedly, this is likely to translate into rising debt stock. And this is what the governor is trying to battle with. Prudent fiscal management on the part of government here is extremely crucial, particularly in the year 2021, to forestall any dangerous economic slippages that could erode all the economic gains made so far as a nation. And I think he made it clear that all the economic gains for the past 3 years have been eroded. So now we have to set ourselves on the road to recovery. So in all, individuals, households, and businesses must learn from the pandemic and know that withholding unproductive consumption expenditure in favor of a future in the form of savings is the best insurance against such unforeseen circumstances. We as scientists know that handling this virus is an extremely difficult one. As we speak, a lot of information have evaded us. The ecology of the virus, the behavior of the virus, the infections, the mode, and all that. Unfortunately, we have found very little space as a nation to invest in research relating to the COVID-19, the coronavirus. And this is where I will ask us, and especially the governor and those handling our fiscal space, to find time and pay particular attention to research into the virus. I think I asked for some concrete recovery strategies as a non-economist to get assurance that, yes, as a nation, we will recover from the shock of this virus. And I think I picked two from what he said. One has to do with expenditure control and management. Wherever you are, whether in an institution, at home, public, private, I think it's essential for us to manage our expenditure. And most especially, the leakages in the system. I think there are so many leakages in our system. When we plug the leakages, I'm sure we'll be able to harness enough to sustain the economy and set us on the road to recovery. And again, he spoke about the revitalization of businesses to enable them attain the level of resilience and recovery. I think we all have a hand to play in this kind of strategy. So thank you very much, Governor, for the insights. Now, since the economy affects all of us in varied ways, it's my fervent hope that we shall be prudent in the exercise of our respective responsibilities to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and work towards a COVID-19 free state. And I think we have a responsibility towards that. Scientists as well as non-scientists, each and every one of us has a responsibility. And what does it entail? It entails that we need to respect the protocols. Wash our hands, use the sanitizers, put on our mask, and keep the social distancing protocol. Thus, we've been able to understand from today's lecture will lead us onto the path of absolute economic recovery and its associated economic benefits to us all as a nation. And I think we need to take very, very great lessons from today's lecture. A broken economy means a broken nation. A broken economy means a broken nation. And we cannot sit for our nation to get broken. So let us play our part as citizens. And let us make sure that we all set ourselves up for a great economic recovery. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chancellor. I call on Ms. Rebecca Donko to give the vote of thanks. Ms. Rebecca. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman and Vice Chancellor of the University of Ghana, Professor Ebenezer Odro-Owusu, Chairman of the University of Ghana Alumni Association, Mr. Richard Okra, our Honorable Speaker and Lecturer, Dr. Ernest Addison, Governor of the Bank of Ghana, members of the University of Ghana Alumni Council, distinguished guests, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen. Please permit me to also associate with the protocol as mentioned by the VC. It's such an honor to be asked to deliver this year's vote of thanks. On behalf of the University of Ghana Alumni Association and the entire university community, I'd like to first of all thank the Almighty God for making this event a success. Special thanks to our Honorable Speaker, Dr. Ernest Addison, for gracing the occasion and sharing with us your findings and opinions today. The depth of knowledge shared, insight into your practice and outlook will prove a vital resource in strategy formulation retreat as we prepare for the 2021 fiscal financial year. We are grateful for your time and experiences shared. I must also mention our deep sense of appreciation to the Vice Chancellor for his leadership, foresight, and support to initiatives such as this in shaping the economic narrative to practical development of our country and businesses. To the Chairman and Council members of the University of Ghana, please permit me to have a wave from all Council members who are present here. If you are on the Council and you are here, please, can we have a wave from you? And a round of applause for all of us. Amidst this pandemic, we've still been able to pull off yet another successful lecture. So please, another round of applause. We deserve it. Thank you. Finally, to all our sponsors, Bank of Ghana, KPMG, Prudential Bank, Zenith Bank, GT Bank, ZPay, Universal Merchants Bank, PricewaterhouseCoopers, United Bank for Africa, Volta River Authority, Le Country Mineral Water, Consolidated Bank, and Chemical, we are so grateful for your continued support. We say, may God richly bless all of you. Yedamwase. And like our motto goes, integri procedamus, let's always remember to stride with integrity. May God continue to bless us and bless our homeland, Ghana. Thank you and have a lovely evening.
Indeed, thank you to Ms. Rebecca Donko. Please, before we rise for the University of Ghana anthem, may I prompt you that we shall interact with Dr. Addison during refreshment, which would be held in the AA Kwapon Quadrangle. Remember at all times to keep a social distance. Yes, the interaction, just keep it. We also ask you to allow the platform party to lead the recession. Thank you very much. Shall we now rise for the University of Ghana anthem?
University of Ghana, the nation sing. Is the purpose of peace and peace is all to do. Our blessed praise, tower of many, is Bible from the Lord. May we proceed in unity to uphold the public cause. Arise, O Lord, defend the cause of faith. Proceed into the integrity to make a nation proud. Proceed into the integrity to make a nation proud. We ask for strength and faithful as we climb the hill of learning. May we excel whatever we do as we prepare to face the world with the mind ready at all times and the conscience quick to feel. May we proceed in unity to uphold the public cause. Arise, O Lord, defend the cause of faith. Proceed into the integrity to make a nation proud. Arise, O Lord, defend the cause of faith. Proceed to make a nation proud. Arise, O Lord, defend the cause of faith. Proceed into the integrity to make a nation proud. Arise, O Lord, defend the cause of faith. Proceed into the integrity to make a nation proud.
Thank you.